And one door closes, another one opens. Change is in the air. Some new faces and some old faces. Lots going on. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Cleanup Spot presented by Baseball Essential. My name is Gershon Rabinowitz, alongside a good friend of mine, Brian Danuff, and we're going to be talking to you about the world of baseball, and specifically May 17th has a lot of different connotations. That day, 17 years to the day that David Wells pitched a perfect game against the Minnesota Twins. History was in the making this afternoon at Marlins Park for a number of reasons. Shelby Miller was on the mound for the Atlanta Braves. Justin Bour getting a base hit in the ninth inning broke up a no-hitter. And then another base hit by Dee Gordon was the only other blemish on his line. A complete game, two-hit shutout. The Atlanta Braves beat the Miami Marlins 6-0, and just minutes after the game, the Miami Marlins decided to relieve Mike Redmond of his managerial duties, along with the bench coach. They were 16-22, just got swept by the Atlanta Braves, lost 7 of their last 8 games. It's really been a rough ride. And were you surprised when you heard about the news regarding Redmond?
Yeah, I was shocked. It's still pretty early in the season, and we've already had now 2 managers get fired. Ron Renneke with the Milwaukee Brewers, and now Redmond with the Marlins. You made a good point. We were talking earlier. Had the Marlins swept the Braves, they'd be at 500. This team has not been so terrible. They had a rough start. They have a solid core, of their roster, a lot of young players. Jose Fernandez is on his way back from Tommy John surgery. And it's not even Memorial Day. To me, I always judge Memorial Day as when you really, make that decision of where your team stands. And the Marlins, in my opinion, still have a chance to rebound. And I don't know if that was going to change with Redmond or without him. I don't think, last season the Marlins weren't in contention. They played well down the stretch. Redmond to me was not a terrible manager, wasn't a great manager, obviously, and I don't think he was necessarily a key to them competing and getting better. But I just don't think the firing is going to make much of a difference this season. There's no word on who he's going to be replaced by. A lot of names being thrown around now, but there's nothing official yet, so we still have to wait on that until tomorrow morning probably. So the Marlins are going to announce it at 11 a.m. at a press conference at Marlins Park. So we'll see then. But this, to me, I don't really understand it. Jeffrey Loria has made a lot of decisions in the past few years that no one really understands, but that's the Miami Marlins for you, and we'll have to wait and see the next manager.
I mentioned 11 a.m. tomorrow is going to be the announcement. Marlins have a game tomorrow night, and then we'll see what happens, whoever's going to be the manager there. But there just seems to be a lack of stability in Florida. That's really how it's been in Miami. In the last 10 years, they've had 7 managers. In their history, this will be the 14th manager in their 23-year history as a franchise. Since Joe Girardi was relieved of his duties when he was manager of the year in 2006, we talked about the list. Freddie Gonzalez was the manager after that. Jack McKeon. You had Edwin Rodriguez, Ozzie Guillen, and Mike Redmond. I mean, how do you develop a plan? How do you develop a game plan to be able to have stability, develop a farm system, be able to develop players on a 25-man roster? That's the thing that really surprised me. And you mentioned about 16-22 being the record. That was the same record that the Marlins had when they fired Jeff Torborg in 2003. And then Jack McKeon took over the first time. And the Florida Marlins at the time, of course, they won the World Series. We don't know what's going to happen there, but if they do get a rookie manager, let's assume it's going to be a rookie manager because they are paying off still the contracts of Mike Redmond. Remember, they gave him an extension in September. He's going to be paid through the 2017 season. Ozzie Guillen is still on their payroll for this season. Larry Beinfest, their president, their former president, is on the payroll also for another year. So let's assume it's a rookie manager. There have only been 2 rookie managers that have ever won a World Series, and that is Bob Brenly or Ralph Houck. So usually these quick fixes, they don't always work.
Right.
So I'm puzzled that they made this so quickly after they seem to have a lot of faith in Mike Redmond. They gave him the extension. They gave Giancarlo Stanton the 13-year contract. So much going on with that. They extended Christian Yelich. They really seemed that they wanted to build around this team. They brought in some veterans like Danny Herring. It just really shocked me. It just came out of left field. I guess it's because I don't know if it was a gut reaction to how Shelby Miller pitched and how how the Marlins pretty much got manhandled by Atlanta so many times this year. I'm not sure if that was the reason, and maybe the version to the Mets, the Phillies playing better baseball, Nationals playing a little bit better. I'm not sure what it was, but I don't think anybody expected it, even though there were some rumors last month.
Not at all. And to me, the thing that I always think about, the Marlins just went through an entire spring training with Mike Redmond as their manager. He developed, all these different things. There's so much more to a manager than filling out a lineup card. So much more to that job. And he did so much, this past winter and did so much in the spring and worked with all these guys. And, I never heard any players complaining. I don't think they didn't like playing for him. Maybe we'll hear things after his dismissal, but to fire a manager a month and a half into a season, when you're not even that far, into the cellar, the Marlins really have a chance. They go on one hot streak and they're right back at 500. This wasn't like a sinking ship. Right now it might be, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the Marlins get hot and contend and still have a chance for a wild card spot, maybe. They need some more pitching. Dan Herron and, David Phelps have really been their best starters so far this season. Ironically enough, David Phelps was acquired, had been a long man with the Yankees, and Dan Herron said he didn't even want to pitch for Miami this season. But, they have a lot of good players. I love D. Gordon, love how they acquired him. Danny Echeverria, he's been great. Martin Prado sitting around 300. Of course, Giancarlo Stanton. There's a lot to like about this Marlins team, and I don't think Redmond was going to make that big of a difference. And I feel like whoever replaces him might have a negative impact because playing for a new manager, everything's turned upside down, and it's such a culture shock, and I don't know how it's going to help the Marlins in the short term.
Well, I think in the short term, at least in 2003, I think it helped when they had Dontrelle Willis and Miguel Cabrera come up from the minor leagues. And the impact that those two guys had at their ages, and they really supplied the fuel that the Marlins needed. The Marlins, remember that they lost A.J. Burnett that year to Tommy John surgery, so they needed somebody to step up in the rotation. Dontrelle Willis did the job for most of the year. That's it, Pavano. And then you had Mike Lowell and some of the other guys. Juan Pierre comes to mind, Luis Castillo. All these guys came together, and then they went on some incredible run. It's really to say what the Marlins are going to do with the new manager, because at least at the point of this show, we don't know who the manager is going to be. We can't really speculate. Obviously, there's a lot of names out there that you're going to see in social media, but we really don't know what the Marlins are going to decide. I'm just assuming that it might be a minor league manager or rookie manager or something like that, just based on the circumstances, just based on where they are in the year. At 16-22, 38 games into the year, 1/3 into the season, it's really hard to figure out what type of impact and what's going on. But also, let's take a look at the managerial career a little bit with Mike Redmond. He inherited a very rough situation. If you remember that the Marlins lost about 100 games the year that he took over, really did not have a bare-bones roster, started developing some of these players, and some of them started to emerge, like Yelich, we mentioned about Marcell Ozuna, and then they started to win some games.
The Marlins improved 15 games last year. Yeah. They finished with 77 wins. It was an improvement. The Marlins had a lot of hot streaks, and people coming into the season were saying, if things break right, they'll be right there with the Mets competing for a wild card spot in the division.
And I think that's the problem. I think that because those expectations were that people expecting them to play like the Mets did. And I don't think a lot of people expect the Mets to be as good as they are this year. No, at least this early with all the young players. And they've had a lot of injuries themselves. And you could talk about some of the Marlins' injuries. They lost Yelich. Jose Fernandez is not coming back until mid-season. So they didn't get any production out of Steve Cishek. Jared Salamakia was released. J.T. Realmuto is a starting catcher, essentially a rookie. So there's a lot of adjustments to that, especially with a pitching staff. And when you haven't really gotten anything out of Tom Kohler, and you really haven't gotten anything out of Matt Latos, who they got in the offseason, Miami native, they expected it. Henderson Alvarez, this was actually his third start of the year because he was out for much of April. He didn't pitch very well today. And then, as I mentioned, Latos got rocked yesterday with 5 runs, too. It was almost like a carbon copy of both games, at least on the pitching side, facing that Atlanta lineup. And it just seems like every time they face the Atlanta Braves, remember, they got swept by the Braves the first week of the season. So it seems like every time they're facing this upstart Braves team that everybody thought was rebuilding, they seem to lose to them. And I don't know if that triggered something. I'm still wondering if it's something because they almost got no hit and getting embarrassed in front of the home fans. And Jeffrey Loria thinking about that, talked about stability with this roster. There's only a couple of guys here that were Florida Marlins that I can think of off the top of my head. They're from the Florida Marlins days. Giancarlo Stanton's one, Steve Cishek is another, and I think Brad Hadd's the only other one.
Yeah, I mean, there's been real roster turnover, and I really don't think this is the. I mean, honestly, I'm not be surprised to see them turning around, but I just don't think that's going to be because of the manager. I just don't.
The question really becomes is how much of an impact does a manager have on a baseball team? I spoke to Buck Showalter a few weeks ago. He told me it's basically the manager, if they could do whatever they can to get the players prepared to play the game, but ultimately it's going to come down to the 25 guys in that locker room. I know it sounds kind of cliche. The Marlins do have that talent. You mentioned Danny Echeverria. He is starting to hit. He's hitting above 300. T. Gordon is leading the National League and baseball in hitting. They have a lot of hitters. Ichiro has done well in place of Christian Yelich. If they get Yelich healthy, he could contribute. So they have a lot of pieces offensively. It's not like they're pretty much like they were a couple of years ago where they didn't have many players on the roster and they only won about 68, 69 games. This is a team that could do something with the right guy in place. The only question is how quickly can that manager, when they do get him in here, can adapt to the system with the Marlins? Is it going to be somebody internally? Is it going to be somebody externally that's been waiting for a manager to roll? Is it somebody that doesn't have any experience? There's so many variables that we won't know, at least until tomorrow, that we could try to piece together and figure out what's going to happen with this Miami ball club.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows? I mean, there's always that flip side of the coin. Maybe this does spark them to play better. In spite of the organization's change. And they it's a wake up call, and then all those things, those positive things come from this. But, you fire a manager this early in the season, it always kind of sends a weird message, a bad message, and we'll have to see what happens from here. I mean, I'm still high on the Marlins. I think they'll turn it around. I think they'll be right there for the wild card for the wild card spot once Jose Fernandez comes back. Trade deadline, it can make some moves. So still got a long way to go in the season. So would not cross off Miami yet.
And with the long-term commitments and the veterans that they have on this team, they look like a team that really looks like that they want to build a contender. They want things to work out. But a lot of times they'll make a move because they just feel that if they don't make the move right now, that they're not going to get the value that they're supposed to get. If you remember in 2012, that offseason, if you remember in 2012 offseason, the amount the Marlins spent, they went after Keith Bell and Jose Reyes, and they spent all that money that they tried to get Albert Pujols. That didn't work out. And just that whole experiment of the money that they spent, the whole rebranding, new ballpark,
right.
It was a complete failure. They made the trade with the Toronto Blue Jays, and look what they get out of it. They get Danny Echeverria, Jake Marisnick, who they got out of that deal. He ends up going to the Houston Nationals, gets them Jared Kozar. They could make over a team. They've done that a long time where they've been able to get prospects for established players. They've been able, if they see something with a manager that they feel he's not the right fit, they're going to let him go because they just don't see him as part of their plans. The only problem is it becomes a revolving door when you're doing this so many times, and then your fan base and everybody that follows you and people within the organization, they wonder what you're doing.
I just remember with 2012, just to emphasize the point you just made, I remember they were apparently very in deep negotiations without the Pujols. I remember, and I just remember hearing that, and that just sent a message to me that, thought the Marlins were legitimate and really making a run. And all the money they spent, it's really amazing how in 3 years, how much the team has really changed. But Jeffrey Loria still hasn't really changed his ways, so he'll make a knee-jerk reaction. He'll do what he has to do until he gets some sort of results, and then once he does, I don't know what he'll do next.
And attendance is another thing that factors in. They really haven't had that many sellouts at Marlins Park. They're still paying off a ballpark. Still have to justify that taxpayer money is going towards the ballpark. A lot of people are not happy about that. They want to see an immediate contender. They want to see a winner. And I don't know if anything has to do with the Tampa Bay Rays having moderate success with a very low payroll with an outdated ballpark in the other side of Florida. If that factors in as well, and they try to compete with the entertainment dollar, and not many people attend games down in Miami. Same thing with the Panthers. Same thing with the Heat post LeBron.
And yeah, LeBron's not even in Miami anymore, and then that's not even an excuse to really point to anymore because he don't have done anything in a while.
There are a lot of challenges that are unique just to that area, and we really can't figure out. And then Lori is dealing with some of that stuff as well. So there's so many ways that you could really look at this. It's just so hard to figure out, and it's going to take a while, at least until there's a new manager in place, to really let the dust settle and see where things go. And another team that is dealing with a lot of different issues and probably even in more deep than the Miami Marlins is the Colorado Rockies, coming off an 11-game losing streak, once again at the bottom of the standings, top of the National League in hitting, and their star shortstop, Troy Tulowitzki, no surprise, another injury with him, and he's disgruntled, and he probably wants out. There have been rumors that he thought about asking for a trade. His agent he spoke to, and then he decided, hey, maybe hold off on it. Heard about a lot of different suitors in the offseason for Tulo's services. He's 31 years old. There's a lot of different questions about if his body could hold up, how can he play outside of Colorado. What do you make of the Troy Tulowitzki situation, and do you think that he finishes the year with the Rockies?
And I really don't know. It's a very weird situation. The latest that we heard was that Tulo has not specifically requested to be traded, but he didn't say that he wanted to stay in Colorado either. It's frustrating to watch the way the Rockies have really developed all this great hitting. Charlie Blackmon, DJ LeMahieu, Corey Dickerson. They've brought these hitters around Tulo and they've developed them. Carlos Gonzalez, of course. Justin Morneau. He's dealing with concussions now, but the Rockies have developed a strong lineup, and yet they still don't have the pitching to support it, and that's why the Rockies have been so terrible for a number of years now. And I understand. People say it doesn't look good on him. It makes him look like a bad guy. I kind of understand it, but at the same time, also, of course, Tulo gets hurt so much, and ironically, as soon as this news comes out, he gets hurt again. And, it's just, that's my thing with Troy Tulowitzki. He is such a great player. He has such a big impact when he's on the field. But when he's not, that contract looks terrible. Everything looks bad. You don't know when he comes back how long you're going to have. My gut says that he'll get traded this year, probably closer to the deadline. I think teams are going to look at him and look at his offensive production when he gets back and realize what he can be when he's healthy. I don't think the Rockies are going to get as much as they really want because of his injury concerns and because of his contract. Whoever acquires him is going to have to eat a lot of his money probably, or the Rockies try to eat a lot of it, but they'll still have to cover a lot of it. Their team, the Red Sox, the Yankees, those are the two teams that have always been really connected to them, the New York Mets. And all those three franchises specifically, though, they seem adamant about trusting their youth and holding on to their prospects and developing their prospects. So I don't expect the Rockies to really be trading with them. I really don't. I really don't know what other team would be logical fit for him right now, but, teams will get desperate. Teams want to make that final playoff push. I think Tulo gets traded in midseason, but I really don't know where.
The one thing that also was a little bit of a wild card is the contract.
Yeah.
He's got about another 5-6 years on it with about $116 million owed. I don't know what team is going to absorb that, and then you have to pay him on top of trading your prospects. I remember I talked to you about this about a week ago, and we were talking with one of the teams, and I remember you mentioned about acquiring Tulowitzki, and I said, hey, we went through this team and went through about 3 or 4 of their prospects, and I said, these are the guys you're going to probably have to give up, plus you're going to have to pay them, or is this team willing to do that when they do have a young shortstop and they could, and they can get by with him. And other teams do that because they have shortstops in the farm system. There are cheaper options out there. The Cleveland Indians could be looking at Francisco Lindor. If they call him up this year, perhaps Jose Ramirez could be out there. He's a young guy that could be on the market. Jed Lowry could be out there when he comes back from his injury if Carlos Correa gets called up. So there are other guys that could be cheaper options than Troy Tulowitzki. Plus, there's a lot of skepticism about his hitting outside Colorado. Every hitter that comes to Colorado, because of the elements, they put up prolific numbers. Look at what DJ LeMahieu was doing, Corey Dickerson, Charlie Blackmon. I'm not trying to discount those guys, but every hitter there, like the Blake Street Bombers, I think that also goes into the Rocky psyche where they realize you could stick anybody at shortstop and they could hit 280 to 300 at Coors Field. So I don't know if that's part of it. They spent a lot of money on cargo. They haven't really developed anything with pitching because of the elements. They've tried pretty much everything. So they figure, if we're not competing, Tulo probably wants out. They have to look at their options, and they spoke to different teams in the off season, and nothing really materialized. I don't know if anything's really going to change at the deadline because the haul is still going to be so great.
Yeah, and it's also you mentioned the contract. He's turning 31 in October. His defense has never been really great. Never been really. I mean, it's just never been that amazing. And 3-4 years ago, Tulo would have been probably one of the best acquisitions you could make. But with that contract, with his age, he's not going to be a shortstop for much longer. Logically, if you want to keep him healthy, you want to keep him in the lineup, and you want to keep him productive overall. So, I mean, a team acquiring him cannot possibly pencil him in as their new franchise shortstop because he's not old, as old as other players. And he still has a lot of years left of his career, hopefully. But this isn't going to be like acquiring, a young guy like a Bryce Harper or just just for a hypothetical. I mean, this guy is going to be only productive for a few more years, and it's a really weird situation in Colorado because the Rockies do, as I said, have this great lineup, but just no pitching to support it. And Tulo, I'm sure he's played his whole career with the Rockies. Made it to the World Series in 2007. Probably the last few memories there and probably wouldn't want to leave if they were playing well. But after such a long career with them and after really only a few short periods of success, I mean, it makes sense for him to be considering other options. And if the Rockies aren't going anywhere, I mean, how can you really blame him?
And if you look at a small sample size, I know it's a bit of a small sample size, 116 at-bats this year, just has 2 walks. 284 average, but a 292 on base percentage.
He's had a really weird season, yeah.
The OPS is incredibly low. His slugging percentage is at 448. You got to wonder if this is just an aberration for the first month and a half because he has the quad injury, and maybe that kind of affected him. But when your batting eye starts to affect you, that's a cause for concern because that's something that at any level, your strikeout to walk ratio should not fluctuate the way it is, especially when Tulowitzki had the strikeouts to walks almost even the last couple of years. And he is considered the premier shortstop. Am I going to try to trade my top prospects, and I'm going to have top 10 prospects, let's say it takes 3-4 of those prospects, surrender them, give them up, and then get it for a guy with declining ability that I have to pay $20 to $25 million a year into his mid-30s when he's one injury where it's almost like right now he's not too old to be forgotten, but he's not too young to try. One injury away from being irrelevant like that, I'm not sure if it's really worth the risk.
I really don't either. I mean, I'm sure for this immediate season, if the team were willing, we're on the cusp of playoff contention, and this is that one move that takes them over the hump, I really wouldn't be surprised to see a team cave like that. I really don't expect the Rockies to simply get what they're asking for, though. I mean, it's going to be a matter of the Rockies accepting what they have with him and what they're reasonably going to get and what they reasonably should be asking for. And I still think they're going to net a blue chip prospect. I think they're going to get a great prospect. But are they going to get a load of prospects that are just going to suddenly rejuvenate the team? No. The Rockies really are in a bad situation. They need pitching, and free agency-wise, no one's going there to pitch for them because no one wants to play in that ballpark. So, I mean, it's just the Rockies are in a tough situation. And Tulowitzki, I just want to say, I really do expect them to be traded, though. I don't see him lasting the whole season. I don't know what it is. I don't. It's just too awkward. It's kind of like the Red Sox and Manny. You kind of felt like they were parting ways. And they did. It's just an awkward situation.
The question that I do have, and that's what I was trying to get to, is there a team out there that's going to absorb that entire contract, that's going to eat up that type of contract? I could think of maybe a couple of teams, maybe the Angels if they're out, if they're in contention because Eric Ivar is going to be a free agent, that could be a possibility. But I don't know how many teams are going to take on that type of money that they're going to be asking for. The Yankees, I'm wondering, I don't see them as an option because
that'd be a big lateral move.
I don't think they're going to give up the prospects. I don't think the Yankees would give up an Aaron Judge or a Luis Severino, and they would probably take that Sanchez and some of the other guys that are really starting to develop in that system. And you're seeing a lot of these different farm systems matriculate and develop and guys getting called up. I don't know how many of these teams are willing to part with that and pay that type of money. And I really think that's why Colorado's going to be stuck with him. I disagree with you. I think they're going to be stuck with him, and they're going to have to try to trade him again in the offseason. And same thing with Carlos Gonzalez, another contract that really has not worked out for them. And speaking of guys, we were talking about guys, at least with Troy Tulowitzki's case, about players that had a downside to their careers, guys that were in the decline phase. Jorge Posada was one of those guys with the Yankees last couple of years. He wrote a book called The Journey Home. Had a lot of interesting things to talk about, especially his relationship with Joe Girardi in the last couple of years. One thing that really struck me in that book, when he was comparing Joe Torre to Joe Girardi, he said, Joe Torre was my father figure on the field. Joe Girardi was my manager.
Yeah, I mean, I love the segue from players with, downsides of their career. That was wonderful. But with Jorge Posada, yeah, I mean, that book has really stirred up a lot of controversy. I mean, really just with the Yankees, obviously. He played his whole career with the Yankees. There isn't much else to talk about. It seems like every time a player writes a tell-all book, there's always these things that come out that are so controversial, so debatable. And, I mean, what can you really dispute about what Jorge said? I mean, he came up through the Yankee system. His whole major league career up until 2008, Joe Torre was his manager, and that whole group from the late 90s were very close. And it was weird though. I mean, it wasn't weird. It was not surprising to hear that Posada wrote what he wrote about Girardi, and that they never really connected. There was always kind of this weird disdain for each other. Kind of felt like, I don't know if it was like a thing with Girardi being a little jealous that Posada took over his job in the late 90s, and Girardi moved on, left the Yankees. Posada, he always came off as a stubborn, arrogant player, and he's personally one of my favorites growing up as a Yankee fan. But I mean, he also talks about the fact that he doesn't think A-Rod should go in the Hall of Fame because of his PED use. That's a sentiment shared by many, I'm sure. The thing that I've always kind of wondered, that I always found fascinating about his career, and what she mentioned, was his frustration with being removed from the catching position after 2010. He felt heartbroken. He felt like the Yankees just pulled the rug out from under him. And that's what I always felt like as well. It was never really talked about, and all of a sudden, boom, Posada was a full-time DH, and he would not catch anymore. And I just think that, and he has a right to say what he said, and I agree with him to a degree. I mean, he plays his whole career as a catcher. It's his position. He had a lot of pride. And when they took that position away from him, it hurt him a lot, and I'm sure it had somewhat of an effect on his final season when he was a DH and he didn't hit so well. And he was benched at one point, and he batted ninth in the line. He was penciled in to bat ninth in the lineup one night and took himself out of the lineup. It's kind of weird because Jorge Posada was always a really productive, solid player, and then the last 2-3 years of his career, there was all this controversy and all this stuff about him. And it was really hard to experience as the events actually unfolded, and now to hear them kind of be rehashed and brought back up now is really interesting because it's only been a few years, and all these headlines still seem so fresh.
And it's very similar to when Joe Torre's book came out back in 2009, the one he wrote with Tom Verducci called The Yankee Years. And you see the whole transition of the Yankees building themselves into this championship contender, and then the years of frustration, not winning a World Championship, losing in a division series seemingly every single year, the loss to the Red Sox, everything that transpired. And the whole cast of characters in the clubhouse, the whole dynamic changing, even some of the coaches changing, I think that started to affect Posada as well. It certainly affected Jeter, as he mentioned a couple of times, and it affected so many other players that were around that you didn't have guys like O'Neill and Tino Martinez and Bernie Williams up until about 2006. He mentioned in the book that he was devastated when Bernie Williams was not offered a contract. Same thing that Joe Torre mentioned, that he didn't understand why Cashman was going the sabermetrics route and wanted to bring in Doug Minkiewicz and Josh Phelps, thinking that the production off the bench would be better than Bernie. He figured that Bernie could help him in a part-time role. And some of those things were shifting it. This wasn't the same dynamic that Posada felt, and then Joe Girardi takes over. He's coming off that year in 2007 where he's hitting over 300, final season for Joe Torre. Posada had an incredible year that year. 2008, he hurts his shoulder. And the relationship between him and Joe Girardi starts to shift. One thing that he was used to under Joe Torre was having that face-to-face conversation. If he was going to be in the lineup that night, he was going to tell him. With Joe Girardi in 2009 at least, or at least when it started in 2009, Girardi would text Posada saying, tonight you're catching, tonight you're at first base, tonight you're at DH. And for Jorge, that felt very impersonal. And he took a bit of a slight to it. He liked the dynamic of the team in 2009, as a lot of people did when they brought in Burnett and they brought in Sabathia, Mark Teixeira, and just the cohesion of that clubhouse was really something special if you remember that season. They win the World Series, everything goes right. And then 2010, things shift a bit. They trade for Curtis Granderson. They bring in Javier Vazquez. And there's a lot of differences, or slight differences, between the two teams. One thing Posada noticed that the players were starting to look at their phones in the clubhouse. They're, not really interacting, not sitting around talking baseball. And for him, it was a lot different. And then by 2010, 2011, the Yankees are already looking to groom his replacement, which ends up being Russell Martin. He's not going to be the everyday catcher. He was already, at times, displaced as the everyday catcher, at least with a couple of pitchers. Like, he wouldn't be able to work with A.J. Burnett. The dynamic between them never really clicked, especially if you remember in the 2009 playoffs. Jose Molina would catch him every single game. So things like that, and then Posada never really adjusted to being the full-time DH. I think he caught just one game in Anaheim his final season, for instance. And just things really changed for him. It just, what every athlete faces at some point. What do I do in my life? What do I do in my career? Do I still have a career? Can I still play this game at this level? So, or just a range of emotions going through Posada's mind. And he still feels that. And he's a very outspoken guy, a very intense player, if you remember. And so he wore his emotions on the sleeve, and now he's in the pages of the book.
You know what amazes me too? Whenever a tell-all book like this comes out, and it's pretty frequent, obviously, when a player's career ends. I mean, I don't even think it's really their prerogative. I think it's more publishers come to them and ask them to just write about their career personally. I know some players do go out and do it themselves and want to do it, but it just always shows you, like, they have such long careers, these people, Jorge Posada, of course. It's just amazing to think of how much they've kept from the media throughout the career, how much they kept bottled up and wouldn't write about, wouldn't talk about, and then all this stuff just comes out in a book. Same with Terry Francona, same with Joe Torre. You can go on and on. These books really tell a lot about, how much more goes on off the field and how little we really do know as these careers go on. I wouldn't be shocked to see, maybe not Derek Jeter, but just to see a player of his caliber come out and write a tell-all book, and someone who we thought was so, pure and had all these, had no conflicts, and then sure enough, all these things come out. With Jorge Posada, he always seemed like the guy that had a lot of conflict, and, he never really wanted to catch in the first place. He started off as a second baseman in the minor leagues. But the one thing he did always want to do was play baseball, and he had a great career. He's going to have his number retired by the Yankees this summer, and it seems like it might be kind of an awkward ceremony unless he kind of mends some of the things he said. But, the book is out, the book is published, and what he said is what he said, and that's how he felt. And, he has every right to feel the way he did and the way he does. And, it's just really fascinating because obviously he was one of those core members of the Yankees of the last decade plus, and it really gives you insight about those teams and what really went on in the clubhouse. And I just ordered it. I know you read it, but I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm sure it's a great read for any Yankee fan, and for any baseball fan, because obviously the Yankees were a big part, and were an overwhelming part of the recent history of Major League Baseball. The 21st century has pretty much been, the Yankees. How much money they spent on, the playoffs they made, all the years they made the playoffs, and Joe Torre, all that stuff. So, really fascinating read, I'm sure. And yeah, Jorge Posada really was quite the guy, quite the player, and I can't recommend it enough. Definitely read it.
And another man who had triumphs at Yankee Stadium is telling it all right now, and that's Texas Rangers outfielder Josh Hamilton. The $125 million man says that Los Angeles Angels front office prevented him from talking to owner Artie Moreno about his troubles. Hamilton's quote said, "I told everyone from Major League Baseball and manager Mike Scioscia, even though I was there and wasn't playing in 2013, wasn't supposed to be the guy I was supposed to be. In 2014, the same thing. I tried to reach out to Moreno. I tried talking to him. Tell him, you know what? I'm working my butt off. I want to be the guy who played against you all these years. I was always turned down by the general manager and team president. They said they would let him know." Hamilton had shoulder surgery, of course, on February 4th. He admitted to having a drug and alcohol relapse. That prompted the Angels to trade him. What do you make of Hamilton's comments?
Well, the situation was really interesting, really complicated, and I wasn't really shocked because everything we had heard was that the Angels really were just not that supportive of Josh Hamilton, and it was very weird to see it. Obviously now he's rehabbing with the Rangers, of course, and he should be back this weekend, in fact, potentially. I don't know. I don't get what the Angels' agenda against Josh Hamilton was. I think they were personally kicking themselves for signing him to that contract after realizing since he wasn't going to be the player that they wanted him to be. It kind of says way more about the Angels and the way they do business than I think Josh Hamilton. It's kind of funny how, when the news first came out, Josh Hamilton had a relapse. It was like, oh, how terrible, what happened, this is so bad. Not even thinking about, what personally happened to Hamilton, just the fact that, he wouldn't be on the field, he might get suspended, the Angels might be in trouble. And then he really was, he really became the full-out, flat-out victim in this case. And obviously, he is the victim, and that he has had these struggles, and he should have gotten the support that the Rangers have been willing to give him. And I just think it's the Angels really frustrated with the fact that they had all this money attached to him, and I don't understand why they literally wouldn't let him speak to Artie Moreno. There's no explanation for that. It's very weird, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? Because it is just really, really frustrating, really confusing.
Well, let's look at it from the case of Josh Hamilton. He was a guy with high expectations, first overall pick in 1999 by the Tampa Bay Devil Rays at the time. North Carolina kid, went on the disabled list, started piercing his body with tattoos, started finding alcohol, and he really nearly squandered everything that he worked for, missed a number of years due to injuries, due to his off-the-field troubles, to the point where the Rays released him. He went to his grandmother, who helped clean him up and really helped turn his life around, and he was able then to get in the Rule 5 draft, went to the Reds, and then later on went to the Texas Rangers in the Edison Volquez deal, and everything seemed to be turning around. And the big difference that I think that he had with the Rangers that he didn't have with the Angels, the support system. He had Johnny Nairn, and Johnny Nairn was a former coach and was pretty much his mentor, and was a guy that was pretty much watching what he was doing, a guy that he could trust with his troubles, go to him for advice, be able to really get on the path to doing things the right way and hitting well, and really just turning around his life and turning around his career. It reminds me a lot of the Yankee prospect Slade Heathcote and some of the off-the-field issues that he had. He had the support of Sam Marcinek, who was a former pitching prospect. And speaking with Slade Heathcote during spring training, he mentioned about how much of an impact he had, and the Yankee organization being supportive and seeing what guys like Pettit and Jeter and watching what they do and seeing the example that they set, how much that helped him. And now Heathcott is having a very strong season in AAA and is on the cusp of making it to the Bronx within a couple of months to about a year. Hamilton needs to have that type of support system once again, what he had with Nairn and what Heathcott had with Marcinek. That's exactly what he needs. I don't know if he had that enough with the Angels, especially with the Angels investing so much money, expecting him to produce the way that he did with Texas. I don't know if that was what happened with him with the Angels and then everything coming out, and it was just really an ugly situation. And coming back to Texas, where they've worked with him, where he's had a level of comfort, and especially with a team right now that is near the bottom of the standings, just looking for help, looking for something. This could really be a chance for Hamilton to turn things around. And finally, out of left field, literally, Barry Bonds, the troubled former San Francisco Giants star, is pursuing a collusion case against Major League Baseball. After the 2007 season, when he led the league in on-base percentage, also hitting over 20 home runs, Bonds is claiming that all 30 Major League teams colluded against him to prevent him from signing another contract and effectively ending his baseball career. According to John Hammond, sources say that Bonds is working on a grievance against Major League Baseball regarding the way his career ended. He could potentially file a lawsuit as well, but appears to be working with the Players Association now, as is allowed by rules, in an effort to address what he sees as an injustice. What do you make of the drama surrounding Barry Bonds 8 years after his career ends?
Well, this is really out of left field, as you said. I always did think it was interesting how Barry Bonds went from hitting 28 home runs in 2007 with a .480 on base percentage to simply not getting any calls, not getting any offers in 2008. It was weird because obviously he was 43 years old then, and it was obvious that his career was coming to an end. But there was clear signs of life in his bat, and there were clear signs that he could keep on hitting and potentially get to 800 home runs. I mean, who knew? If he played 2 more seasons at 20 home runs, he was there. It's an interesting case, though. It was weird because I personally thought that, Barry Bonds, I thought he had kind of mended all his problems and all his demons. I remember seeing a picture of him a year or two ago. This is how he is now, but that he's lost so much weight. He bikes a lot. He works out a lot. He is very thin. He is just as thin as he looked when he was with the Pirates, before allegedly coming into contact with PEDs. He's throwing the first pitch at Giants games. He worked with them in spring training. He apparently worked with Alex Rodriguez in the off season, ironically enough. This is kind of weird. This kind of brings up more controversy just when it seemed to all be going away for Barry Bonds. Obviously, the Hall of Fame debate was still there, but everything else, off the field, on the field, he seemed to have been a piece of his career. But I don't really know. I guess like we talked about before the show, I guess he wants to be paid what he could have gotten, and he said he would play for the league minimum in 2008, as he was claiming. It's kind of amazing to think of all the money he's made that he's really going this far just for $500,000. I think Barry Bonds could have played, but I totally understand teams not going after him for all the baggage he brought, for all the PED allegations, and it was very much up in the air in 2007 and 2008. That was like when it was the highest. People really didn't know, and it was kind of awkward. It was very awkward to see him break the home run record, and people celebrated in San Francisco, but all around the country, people were really questioning him and really not celebrating the achievement. People were saying, no, sorry, Hank Aaron is still the leader, and it was very interesting. Personally, I don't think I would call it collusion. I would call it simply every team realizing that we don't need him, we don't need everything he brings, and I remember reading an article, that they just, I think Craig Santapera looked at from, NBC Sports Hardball Talk. I think he looked at potential places for Bonds to go in 2008. It made a lot of sense, but I wouldn't call it collusion. I really wouldn't.
Now, if you look at Barry Bonds' career when he did enter the league, he entered the league in 1986 and the 80s when there was that escalating frustration and tension between the players and the owners. And if you remember, in the early 90s, there was that lawsuit between the players and owners over collusion with free agency, that the owners would stop signing free agents from the period between 1985 and 1987, leaving many top players on the market. Bonds was a rookie at the time, and he always felt like in his life that he was slighted. There were people that used to call him Bobby, thinking that mixing him up with his father, Bobby Bonds, and he always hated that. He hated the attention that Andy Van Slyke with the Pittsburgh Pirates, thinking that it was a racial thing with him. Van Slyke was a lesser player in his eyes, and understandably so. Bonds winning 2 MVPs and everything that went on, his frustrations with Jim Leland. He felt threatened by Jeff Kent when he was with the San Francisco Giants. All those times where he felt like he always had to prove himself, and he always feels like he has to assess his value, he has to get what he deserves, and that's what he's hoping for. I'm guessing it's a financial thing. That's the only reason I could see that you're opening up this case 8 years later. But according to lawyers, he probably needs to bring more substantial evidence because it's so long. You would need memos, you would need emails. Front offices, they say, are a lot smarter than they used to be, even back in the 80s. But the defendants, according to Craig Caletter in the article with USA Today, he mentioned that Bonds would need more substantial evidence. But I think it's really something with Bonds that it's about him wanting what he deserves, always feeling threatened, always feeling threatened by somebody else and feeling slighted in a way. And I think that's really what it's been with Bonds. It's always been that way. And I think it's just another one of those cases, but it's just so surprising that it comes out nearly a decade after his playing career ends.
Yeah, it's the timing that really is strange. It makes sense for him to maybe think of collusion, as you said, but I really don't think that was it. I think teams, as I said, just simply they didn't need a 44-year-old Barry Bonds on their team in 2008. They just didn't. I mean, as productive as he could have been, it's just everything else that came with him. It just wasn't worth it.
All the media attention, all the coverage.
It's the same reason why, hypothetically, if A-Rod was a free agent at the beginning of the season, no team was signing him. And look at how productive he's been for the Yankees so far. But in reality, he probably would not have been in baseball right now if his contract had expired during the suspension.
And it's like that with a lot of players when they have a lot of baggage and they have those big contracts, or they've had that history that Barry Bonds has had, dealing with all that media coverage, dealing with all the baggage and everything that comes with it. And speaking of the media, you could check out our media coverage at BaseballCentral.com for the latest trades, news, rumors, you name it. It's on there. For Brian Danuff, my name is Gershon Rabinowitz. You can follow Brian Danuff at Brian Danuff. You can follow myself at Gershon Ryan. You can follow Baseball Central at BB_Central. You can follow us there. Time to say goodbye. We will talk to you soon here on the Cleanup Spot.